So hello, everyone. So welcome to the South Coast Conservation Program's second of two Winter Lunch and Learn webinars. My name is Tamsin Baker. I'm the coordinator of the South Coast Conservation Program. And the South Coast region that we cover, it includes the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. And I myself today am very lucky to live and work in the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Helping me here today in the background, we have Tasha Murray. Those of you might know Tasha. She's waving there. She's a consultant with the Invasive Species Council of Metro Vancouver, but she's also on the South Coast Conservation Program Steering Committee. And that's our governance group of stakeholders that help to oversee and guide the SCCP. So she's going to make sure everything hopefully runs smoothly behind the scenes. Any questions on tech, you can direct it to her. And also, we obviously not going to have time, unfortunately, to go around and have you all introduce yourselves. But if you'd like, please go ahead and introduce yourself, who you are, or where you are, and the First Nation territory you're in the chat. Say hi to everyone else so they know who else is here. Now, okay. So now, this is our title. We're going to talk about the South Coast Land Management Program. But before we do that, some of you, I want to give a really quick introduction because some of you may not have heard about the South Coast Conservation Program. And I know we have very similar sounding names. And what you're going to learn today is who we are, but also how we're different. You're going to hear all about the South Coast Conservation Land Management Program and all the many interesting projects that they do. But for us, the South Coast Conservation Program, we're a regional conservation program on BC's South Coast. We've been around since 2005, and the South Coast region includes the upper and lower Sunshine Coast, the Sea to Sky, Metro Vancouver, and Fraser Valley regions up to the area around Hope. And our mission is to reverse the decline of species and ecosystems by facilitating and coordinating actions through connections and collaborations with conservation partners. And what I mean by conservation partners is those land use decision makers and practitioners that include landowners, developers, QEPs, First Nations, municipal, regional, provincial, federal governments, ENGOs, land trusts, and post-secondary institutions. And how we work is we want to create connections between various groups, want to encourage collaborations to take action. We want to knowledge share some of the latest information, which is why we do webinars like we're doing today. And also we want to promote effective stewardship, and you're going to learn about stewardship projects today as well. And so that's just a really short summary of who we are. And I just want to give you all just a very quick reminder, keep your eyes and ears open about our next event. If we don't do one sooner, the one we always do in the fall is our Conservation Connections event, which is an in-person event, networking event with a whole slew of interesting speakers on conservation of species and ecosystems. So stay tuned for that. We'll be hosting it again this year. And so also I want to say thank you to our sponsor today and who helps the SCCP quite a bit, which is Environment and Climate Change Canada. So a big thank you to them. And before I introduce our speakers today, we have a really interesting presentation lined up. You've noticed we're recording this talk, so we will be making it available for you, and we'll let you know when it is available. And when you close out, when you're done and you close out your Zoom window, a short survey is going to pop up. And if you don't mind just taking a minute, giving us a little bit of feedback, we would really appreciate it. And in terms of how the presentation is going to work, we're going to have a presentation, obviously, and then there'll be a question period afterwards, probably around 12:45-ish. And but as the presentation is happening, please feel free if you have questions, put them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So that is all the housekeeping details. And so without further ado, we're going to learn today all about the South Coast Land Management South Coast Conservation Land Management Program, also pronounced as SCCLMP. So you might hear them say that. And we have two presenters here today talking about that organization. So first we have Alison Martin. She graduated from SFU BCIT Masters of Ecological Restoration Program in 2021. But since then, she's been working for SCCLMP, supporting field and restoration projects. But in 2024, just last year, she moved into the coordinator position where she oversees a range of habitat enhancement and restoration efforts. She works with the program's partner organizations to provide input and support for projects that fall within all their conservation lands in the South Coast, and she previously worked for Metro Vancouver Regional Parks. And joining Alison here today is Megan Goard. Megan joined Ducks Unlimited Canada in September of 2024, and she's currently the field operations lead for SCCLMP. She acts as the on-the-ground person managing 11 wildlife management areas and numerous other conservation lands. That's quite a few, via restoration efforts and habitat conservation techniques, which she's going to talk about today. And prior to her current position, she worked in invasive plant management with Diamond Head Consulting and has received a Bachelor's of Ecology and International Development with a certificate in environmental conservation from the University of Guelph. And so welcome you two. I'm going to stop sharing my slide and pass it over to you for your presentation. Welcome.
All right. Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Tamsin. Hello, everyone. I'm Megan. I'm here with Allison on behalf of the South Coast Conservation Land Management Program. And today we're going to be discussing who and what we are, what kind of work we do, and we're going to put particular emphasis on a couple of ongoing projects right now. So I want to start this presentation as well by acknowledging that the land on which I'm coming to you from online is the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, whose historical relationship with the land continues today. And I just want to thank everyone for coming and listening in on who we are and what we do, what we're doing on the South Coast. And again, thank you, Tamsin, for having us. Okay, so who and what is the South Coast Conservation Land Management Program? So the South Coast Conservation Land Management Program, also known as SCCLMP, actually, to save some oxygen, is a partnership between the Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship, Ducks Unlimited Canada, the Nature Trust of BC, and Environment and Climate Change Canada. So the primary purpose of SCCLMP is to conserve and manage over 37,000 hectares of provincially designated conservation lands throughout the BC South Coast, all for the benefit of regionally to internationally significant fish and wildlife species. So our program is based off of the successful model of the West Coast Conservation Land Management Program that operates on Vancouver Island, the Central Coast, and Haida Gwaii. And the purpose of the South Coast Conservation Land Management Partnership is to provide a more collaborative and integrated approach to on-the-ground management of the South Coast provincial conservation lands. And this is for the benefit of fish, wildlife habitats, which includes species and ecosystems at risk. So here's a bit of a closer look at the conservation lands that we manage. So the left map shows properties on the South Coast, including wildlife management areas such as Boundary Bay, Sturgeon Bank, South Arm Marshes, Roberts Bank, and Pitt Addington Marshes. And then on the right is a map showing properties kind of going into the Fraser Valley there. And this includes WMAs such as Burnt Brink, Chilliwack River, Lahat, Harrison, Chehalis, and that's just to list a few of the larger highlighted polygons on the map there. We also manage the Squamish Estuary WMA and the Pemberton Wetland WMA, which is not shown on those maps. So the organization of SCCLMP is led by a steering committee that consists of representatives from each partner organization, and daily activities are managed by the program coordinator, Alison, who assists the partners in achieving core priorities. And so these priorities include implementing management plans on key partner lands, including site monitoring and evaluation of fish, wildlife, and habitat, identifying opportunities for species at risk recovery, implementation and habitat management, supporting the acquisition of new lands by partners to protect fish and wildlife habitat, as well as maintaining and developing partnerships with First Nations, municipalities, local stewardship groups, and others. So how do we act on these core priorities and what do these look like in our work? So like most environmental programs and organizations, a lot of our field work occurs during the spring and summer. And in this time, we hire crews to aid in achieving SCCLMP's goals. So there is a large focus on priority invasive plant species control throughout the conservation lands, both mechanically and chemically, following the current provincial priority invasive species list and best management practices for treatments. So just a few examples demonstrated in the pictures there. Most of our invasive plant management is done mechanically and through physical removal of all parts of the plant, depending on the BMP for the species. So for example, there's some images of removal of perennial pepperweed at Boundary Bay. We've got cutting of Scotch broom at the Harrison Chehalis WMA. But then other examples of mechanical treatment, of course, include the laying down of benthic barrier at the Serpentine WMA there in Surrey to treat yellow flag iris. As recommended by the province, we chemically treat particular species as well, such as Japanese knotweed. And we do so abiding by regional regulations, respecting pesticide-free or PFSED boundaries. And then we also monitor a biocontrol agent, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, to Galerusella beetles, purple loosestrife beetle, for the treatment of purple loosestrife in Boundary Bay, which we have an image on the far right there of our crews doing some monitoring there. Besides our invasive work, we also support our priorities. We monitor water control, particularly in wetland properties, and we monitor public recreational use on conservation lands, ensuring regulations are put in place to protect fish, wildlife, and habitat, whilst, of course, encouraging environmental interpretation and appreciation from the public. We organize and participate in community outreach events with partners, such as planting events, planting native shrubs and tree species, both for restorative and for educational purposes on the conservation lands. The image on the far right is actually a planting event that we collaborate with BCIT with to create wetlands at one of our properties, and we also do native planting through that. We also contribute to the Canadian National Wetland Inventory by sampling and surveying wetland-based properties managed by SCCLMP, and this is for the purpose of ECCC research. We support ongoing projects with our organization, so for Alison and I, that being Ducks Unlimited Canada. And we do this through data collection and applied research, such as supporting projects on marsh recession at Sturgeon Bank and Roberts Bank, just to give one example. We also apply for and find new opportunities to create projects within the conservation lands that align with our core priorities, two of which Alison and I will be talking about today. And finally, we report on projects and field activities to contribute to provincial and national environmental databases. Yeah. So I'm going to pass it over to Alison now.
Yeah. So I'm going to be like one of the kind of two topics we kind of picked for this presentation was the Western painted turtles at our property in Pitt Meadows, Pitt, Addington, Marsh WMA. So just a little bit of background. Actually, I'll start with the turtles. So the Western painted turtles are the only freshwater turtle in BC. They are currently blue listed in the province, and they don't have a ton of habitat just because they tend to like areas that we like. So alteration or destruction of their habitat is the main threat faced by in BC. So they require specific habitat. So wetlands and ponds for hiding and foraging adjacent to upland, which I can't see it. Upland areas with suitable soil for nesting. So it's very particular kind of habitats they're looking for. And we also like those areas. So a lot of the times they're almost always in valleys or lowlands in the southern parts of the province, which we also like. So another kind of threat to them is the high traffic mortality on roads that are located beside wetlands, disturbance of basking or nesting turtles by the public, trampling of their nests, and illegal capture for pets. So they're a very special turtle. They're not found many places in the South Coast. So we're kind of lucky that we do have a population in one of our WMAs, because that's the whole point of the WMAs for protection of wildlife and their habitat. But it's kind of they're tricky species. Do you mind just going to the next slide? So just kind of diving into like the location and all that. So the Pitt Addington WMA is located in the Pitt side of it is in Pitt Meadows, and then the Addington side is in Coquitlam. It was designated WMA in 1987. It's about 3,000 hectares large, and the kind of primary purpose of this is a management of important wetland habitat in close proximity to the lower mainland urban population. So this is kind of a good example of like what SCLAMP, how that program works, where we have this huge area, and most of the land is owned by the province, but also that little Addington point in the south there, that's land owned by the Nature Trust of BC. So they lease it to they lease their property to the province so that we can have the greater conservation land. And we work really closely with the Nature Trust, specifically in that portion of the property, on our management goals. And then we also, the Ducks Unlimited side, I believe they have the water license, so they manage for the Pitt side of the property. So they manage all the water control structures. And they're responsible for the water control structures within this area. So we work with them closely with that as well. So I think this kind of shows just how important these kind of programs are, rather than like each organization doing their own thing, working in their own silos. We're kind of all working together on a common goal of protecting this land and making sure like all our priorities already kind of align, but it's like rather than working in our own kind of silos, we all come together through me and Megan's work. So getting into kind of the more issues with the turtles, do you mind getting in slides? So actually, could you go back? Sorry. So you can kind of see I've labeled where the turtle beach is within the property. So it's while it's on a dike and it's on like kind of a long walking trail, it is kind of remote. Not a lot of people walk there. I'm there all the time, and I rarely see anyone out to that particular area of the property. So it's good in the sense that it's isolated, but this also comes up with a lot of management issues, which I will kind of go into. Okay, next slide. So the beach was created in 2018, 2019, I believe. I might be off, but I'm pretty sure it's kind of in that area. So this was done by removing the reed canary grass. Sand was deposited, and then they built, and I think it was led by ducks. They built the fence around the beach just to keep the public out. And then they also put landscaping fabric down, which was good in one sense, but also not great, because then you're blocking access to the beach from the turtles. So half of it had fabric and the other half didn't. And this kind of resulted in like the first photo where like the sand is just covered in horsetail and reed canary grass. So we started, the program didn't have field crews until 2021. So that's kind of when we started to really get hands on the ground throughout the summer. So we started doing annual maintenance in 2021. The first maintenance was in the fall of 2021, and we removed the fabric, which was great because it had this really good sandy sediment on the beach, and that's what the turtles want. But the problem is we just can't keep up with the how quickly the vegetation is growing back. So back to that. And then after 2021, we did annual summer maintenance in 2022, 2023, 2024, when we have our field crew and we have the feet on the ground. And then we also conducted a fall maintenance this year. So kind of the thing with these turtles, it's like you kind of need to have two maintenance every year. It's like one kind of just removing the vegetation before they nest on the beach, and then a second one in the fall where you can kind of dig into it, like you can kind of really start digging into the beach a little bit more because the turtles have left the beach. And then we also conducted a hatchling release in 2022. I can't remember. I believe the hatchlings came from a lab in the North Shore, and I can't remember the exact number that we have. Sorry. I can't remember the exact number we released, but we're kind of like we're operating that we know that the turtles are there. So how can we find a solution to this kind of one big issue that we have, which is the beach maintenance? So do you mind Next slide. So essentially the photo on the right is what it looks like. That was what it was looking like before we did the maintenance. So just covered in reed canary grass, covered in horsetail. And then that's what the photo on the left is kind of what it looks like after the maintenance. Typically only lasts a few weeks though before the horsetail starts popping up again. So yeah, this is the biggest kind of maintenance kind of issue that we're facing right now. It's just how do we maintain this beach? Because we just can't keep up with it. We think that when when the sand was deposited, when the first beach was first created, that the sand was likely contaminated, which just makes it more challenging to keep up with it. And just with how these turtles utilize the beach, they're almost always on the beach. So it's like you have to find that perfect timing as well, which is unfortunate because it doesn't always align with when we have our field crews. So kind of we know that the turtles are there, and we also work with I think it's the Coast Painted Turtle Organization, and they regularly receive report like sightings of the turtle in the area, but we don't know if the turtles are actually using this beach because the vegetation it's not, they need the sand and they need it to be clear of vegetation for them to be attracted to this beach to nest. So we're trying to like figure out a solution for this problem that we're having. So yeah, we know the turtles are there, but we just don't know how they're using the beach. So we know that they are around and they're nesting somewhere, but we don't know if they're using this beach specifically. So last year we installed a wildlife camera. Do you mind just switching it? So these are kind of the things that our camera has picked up, everything except for the turtles. And you can also see how quickly that vegetation grows back. I think all of these photos, except for the one in the bottom left-hand corner, that was after our maintenance, our annual maintenance in the spring. So yeah, it's really challenging because we just don't, it's this like, we want to do something like maybe put benthic barrier down, or like more landscape fabric, but we just don't know if the turtles are there or not. And since they use the beach all year round, we kind of have to keep that in mind. So this year we are planning on conducting beach maintenance throughout the summer, and then potentially working to find a better beach location, and just potentially giving up on this location and moving somewhere that's a little bit more suitable in the sense of like where the turtles are going to be attracted to, and also just keeping access in mind, because this portion of the dike, you either have to drive on a drive on the dike, or it's about a half an hour walk from the closest parking. So just keeping that in mind, like that balancing between like what the animal need or the species needs, and like also our maintenance needs, given that we're kind of limited with capacity, and that a lot of the maintenance should be occurring outside of when we have our field staff. So that's kind of all I have. So I'll just pass it back to Megan.
Perfect. Yeah, so I am going to be talking about another one of our projects that's ongoing right now. So that being a coastal sand ecosystem restoration project within the Boundary Bay WMA. So a little bit about Boundary Bay. It's a wildlife management area that is 11,000 hectares large, and it pans across parts of Tsawwassen, Delta, and Surrey to the south. And it's a vital link in the Pacific Flyway, and it contains important habitat for migratory and non-migratory birds alike year-round. And so the WMA is made up of intertidal salt marshes, mudflats, and open water marine habitat, and our very unique coastal sand ecosystem. So in the spring of 2024, SCCLMP received seed grant funding from the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation. And this funding was to look into the feasibility of a restoration project in the coastal sand ecosystem at Beech Grove in particular, in the Boundary Bay WMA. So on the left there, that's the kind of a zoom in of this Beech Grove area, and that's where our site is located. So the purpose of conducting this research is to highlight the rarity and significance of coastal sand ecosystems, or I'll refer to them as CSEs, particularly in the lower mainland of BC, where they are hard to come by. So upon applying for the seed grant with HCTF, there are 4 target species that were identified in pictures of them on the right there. Those being the common nighthawk, the horned lark, the vesper sparrow, and Audin's night-stalking tiger beetle. All of these species of which are red or blue listed within this region. And so a large purpose of this research is to find restoration techniques that support increased presence or potential return of at-risk species to this particular area. So most of these species actually hold commonality in nesting in open sandy areas. And so thus this became one of the focuses for building adequate restoration techniques for this CSE. Another large purpose for this feasibility study was to highlight the impacts of human recreational use on the land and the ways in which that it acts as a threat to such a sensitive ecosystem, and thus to find techniques to kind of contest unwanted impacts. So in the summer of 2024, we began some of the on-the-ground research to obtain knowledge of the site and to help better understand its current conditions. So primarily this consisted of crews conducting vegetation surveys. And so we identified 29 distinct plots to do that at. So this helped identify prominent plant species, especially in higher density vegetated spots along Beech Grove site, to get a deeper understanding kind of the composition of this CSE. And so upon doing that, the dominant species within these plots included seashore saltgrass, silver burr ragweed, American dune grass, and large-headed sedge. And the sedge was found particularly in plots that consisted of open sandy areas as well. Doing these vegetation surveys also helped identify the prominence of invasive plants at this site. So coastal sand ecosystems in this area, such as Iona Beach, Savory Island, have had intense issues with Scotch broom presence, which I know SCCP is pretty familiar with. And so surveying the site kind of determined that the same issue does not exist at the Beech Grove site, which is great. Fortunately, SCCLMP does treat the entirety of the Boundary Bay WMA for priority invasive species every summer. So invasive plants is not the largest concern for the site, but they are still present. So some of the common invasive species that are found throughout the site are different thistle species, scentless chamomile, and Himalayan blackberry. Then in the fall of 2024, we conducted log surveys to better understand the presence of large woody debris at the site. That's one of the main things going on. So these surveys included measuring log length and width, determining if they were processed timber or not, checking for creosote contamination, and scoping out the areas of accumulation in relation to open sand and vegetated areas. And so there were a few things that kind of became evident upon doing these surveys. It became evident that logs here serve a role in acting as a barrier to the sea and to help protect local residents from potential weather and flooding events. So there were areas where the logs had washed up and formed a kind of wall in which sand had also accumulated to add to this barrier in front of housing. And as you can see from the image, the houses do sit right on the beach in this area. These are also areas in which it appears that the shore is expanding out towards the sea, which would be really interesting to measure in the future. Not something that we did here, but it would be interesting to keep note of that. Secondly, it became evident that the logs also acted as a barrier against human trampling of plants in some instances where they were more sparsely located, the logs that being. There was greater vegetation presence in areas immediately behind collections, again, more sparse collections of large woody debris, which was cool to see that they kind of acted as that natural barrier. And then the third thing that became evident, that there are areas of large anthropogenic log accumulation that do not serve any purpose for the environment other than taking up large amounts of space at the site and hindering the growth of plants in these specific areas, which I will show in the next slide. So I connected, after doing this field work, doing the log and vegetation surveys, I connected with some partner groups and individuals with experience in CSE restoration to get some further insight on similar projects and techniques that have been used in BC, particularly on the coast. So using this data we collected from the field, we started developing potential restoration techniques with the goals of increasing sandy areas for target species and decreasing unwanted human disturbance via recreational use in mind. So I've circled on the image there, one area where there is a large abundance of anthropogenic log accumulation that isn't serving any purpose really as a barrier for weather events and for protecting housing. Um, and it just appears that it's hindering the growth of vegetation and taking up open sandy space. So one technique that I'm going to talk on is to remove some of this large woody debris from particularly congested areas such as this, especially anthropogenic large woody debris. Yeah, in areas where they do not act as protective barriers for housing, so that we can open up space and create open sandy areas in spots in which more CSC plants can also grow. Native plants can take over there. The logs, a second part to this, the logs that are being moved, or some of the logs that are being moved or removed, can also then be placed in a fashion throughout the site in which natural boundaries can be, or natural quote unquote boundaries can be created to kind of discourage recreational users from walking on this newly cleared plot. And the idea behind this is that it can be done in conjunction with potential rope boundaries to help reduce the impact of recreational users on such a sensitive ecosystem itself, but then on this newly opened up space, which I know has been successful at Iona Beach, in Buccaneer Bay has also used these rope fencings. Yeah, so basically moving these logs would open up new sandy space for our target species to also use as nesting ground. Now, another important aspect to keep in mind for restoration feasibility, which we found through doing this project, is to find ways to educate the public on this rare coastal ecosystem. So SCCP has actually focused on this in the past within the Beech Grove region by designing interpretive pamphlets and signage that brought awareness to local residents and visitors alike about the importance of the CSC and its rare species. So there's an example of one of their older signs that used to be up in that area, just on the left. And since there's so much recreational use in Beech Grove, I think that interpretive signage and other forms of education in the area will be a really important part of restoration here. And it'd be worthwhile to find a means of highlighting target species and bringing to light the significance of native CSC plants. It is also an area with lots of new development, a lot of new people coming in and out of the area. So it feels like a good time to be doing that. And a large part of ensuring that our physical restoration techniques are successful is also to ensure that local residents and visitors understand why it's occurring and what's so important about this environment to be doing restoration on it. And sort of what's next for this project. So since it is a seed grant feasibility study, there's the aspect of reporting on it all. And then hopefully the next step would be to find funding to support some of this implementation of these restoration techniques and to kind of put our research and our findings on the ground and into the environment. Yeah, so that's my talk on our second project there. A little quicker than anticipated, but I just want to say thank you for everyone for listening in. Thank you, Tamsin and SCCP for having us. We do have both of our emails up here, so if anyone has, insights about any of these projects, opportunities to collaborate in the future, or just questions, we'll leave those up there as well.
Great, thank you both. Yeah, we definitely have time for some questions. So leave questions, please. You can put them in the chat, and we have a few already here. So I'll start with this one, which is going back to, I think, explaining sort of the organization and sort of how partners, like the partnership that's created it. We have a question that asks, can you describe briefly what arrangement you have with the province, especially with the walrus, or other agencies like Ducks Unlimited to manage WMA's other conservation lands? If you could talk about that arrangement that sort of created the SCCLMP.
Yeah, so I can speak on that. So essentially, we have um, there's a there is an agreement for the program between the partner organizations, specifically though between Ducks Unlimited and the province or Walrus. Um, so essentially, we're like contract. Megan and I are contractors of Walrus. We're Ducks Unlimited employees, but we're kind of like both in one way. So we have access to the ministry vehicles. We both have desks at the ministry office in Surrey. But Ducks Unlimited is the one who administers our funding. So we were Ducks Unlimited employees. And the way the partnership kind of works with this sense is that I have my Ducks supervisor, which is Eric Balk, and then I have my ministry supervisor, who is Lise Gallant, and she's the sector head for the fish and aquatic sector, I think wildlife sector. Um, and then we kind of do like I'm kind of the point person for the program, and I kind of reach out for support from either side. We work definitely a little bit more closer on the ministry side of things, but there's a lot of ducks projects that occur within the WMAs, and then also with Nature Trust as well. So I can't remember exactly what the agreement is, but we have like a 5-year agreement that gets renewed every 5 years. And then just how I think it's more of like the province is involved because they are the ones who actually own the land. And then it's like the Nature Trust leases their land to the province so that we can create the WMAs. Yeah, I think that kind of answers the question.
What
But
year did you start?
I think I think it was 2018 or
Hmm.
2017, 2018.
And one thing I was asked talking to you guys earlier about it is you're not alone in this kind of arrangement. Do you want to
No.
just maybe talk a little bit about across the province or these kind of arrangements to manage conservation land?
Yeah. Yeah. So, as Megan mentioned, the West Coast Conservation Land Management Program was first, and our program was kind of modeled off of that. The main difference between the two, though, is that Nature Trust of BC is the one who administers the funding for there. So, like the WCLMP employees are Nature Trust employees, while we're Ducks employees. So it's a bit confusing, but throughout the province, I don't think there's another program that's specifically like this, that there's people like who are specifically in charge or managing these areas. It's more of like existing like Nature Trust employees or ministry employees who are kind of assigned managing the conservation land. So it's kind of unique, this region of the province, that there's like a specific program dedicated to it. But I also would think that I think there's a need for this because there's so many more people involved or different organizations involved. And just because we're so close to highly populated areas and there's just so much land to manage. So it's kind of crazy that there's only 2 people managing this year round. And Nature Trust has a little bit. I mean, the WCLMP, I think they also have like 2 or 3 people who are full time. But I think, yeah, I think these programs really show how important it is that just the collaboration. It doesn't make sense that like 2 organizations are doing the exact same thing on the same area of land. So yeah, it's just kind of a cool kind of intersection of land management where
Mhm.
we're coming together and working together. And like partnership is what drives this program. So it's, yeah, we try and make as many partnerships as we can.
Yeah, it's a continuity that it brings to the management of the sites, and
Yeah.
sort of yeah, you said like that's man. I think a lot of people here agree that once a land's protected, the management there's always things to do, especially like you said in
Hmm.
this region in particular. And so you gave the example of the Coastal Sound Ecosystem Project on Beach Grove, which yes, the SCCP was involved in a few years ago before you guys, and but
Hmm.
it's nice to see because our group isn't more we're more about the partnerships and education and things. You're more the on the ground, you have the capacity and you're doing that, so I'm very pleased to see that that's sort of being continuing. It makes more sense for the
Hmm.
organization to do that, but obviously we're here to support it as well.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay, great. Looking here, so then we have it, so to your talking about the Pitt Addington, we have a question here from Lori Bates Fremo that she says, I visited Pitt Addington in fall last year, and I swear I heard bullfrogs. Perhaps predation is also issues for
Yeah.
hatchlings and juvenile western painted turtles, question mark. Are you having issues with bullfrogs?
I would assume that there's bullfrogs. Yeah, I would assume so, that there's likely bullfrogs at Pitt. I have seen some of the red-eared sliders there as well, which isn't surprising, just given how close it is to the lower mainland and it's easy access. So people just go and drop their pets off that they don't want. Um, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a bullfrog there. Um, that's one species that we have kind of had to deal with at other properties, specifically kind of going back to, I think Megan kind of brought it up that we've worked with. We were doing a planting at at Forsland Watson and Langley at BCIT, and that's kind of a part of a larger work that we do where we've created a few wetlands as a part of their undergrad wetland restoration course. So the students come out and we build a wetland on these properties. And that was one thing that like we're trying to find that balance between supporting it's like the red-legged frog, but also we know that there's bullfrogs there. So how do we manage these two species that we're not encouraging the population growth of the invasives, but also giving the red-legged frog a space.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's a good point. I'm curious to see if I need to look through we need to look through our notes and our files to see if there's actually any sightings of or like data about the American bullfrog at Pitt, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, if you'll be able to hear them later in the season. Uh,
Yeah.
and then Pamela from the city of Surrey just also mentions, along with bullfrogs, there's also like a bass, smallmouth bass,
Yeah.
throughout the wetlands there. Although she says, I think the Coastal Partners in Conservation, and I think they're related to the Coastal Painted Turtle Project, which the
Hmm.
ones that breed and are involved with the turtle conservation, that they try to collect turtle eggs for head starting before they hatch.
Hmm. Yes. And I think that's where the turtles that we released came from. I think they
Mhm.
have a lab in
North Van,
North
yeah.
Van. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. And so I guess it sounded like when you were talking about that area, that you haven't really seen any turtle. You're keeping an eye out. You know there's turtles, but
Yeah.
yeah, and whether they're
The
using that beach or not.
we had some basking logs that were right in front of the beach, and in 2022 we did see the turtles using those basking logs, and there was quite a bit, and that was before we did the release. Um, but I haven't seen them personally since then. Also, the basking logs, I think there was like a flood of during one of the many weather events we've had, something's happened to the basking logs. So I haven't seen them in a few years, but I know that the Coastal Painted Turtle group, there is an active beach elsewhere in that property.
Oh,
So that's also like we know that they're there, but that's like a potential location that we um might look into moving the beach to. But it's hard because you don't want to have it too close to the population, but also we need access to maintain it.
I'm sure as either Metro Vancouver or the Coastal Painted Turtle Group could talk about that with Burnaby Lake. I think there's quite
Yeah.
a easy access beach there. Yeah, and that's the balance case you're trying to do. Like you mentioned with coastal sands, you're in these areas that can be highly populated, and
Hmm.
people like to get out there and enjoy. That sign they had with the person chasing away the bird, it should be a dog chasing away. Like, don't
Yeah.
have your dogs chase them.
Well,
Uh,
that interesting thing with that sign is that's one of our new like regulations in in the coastal sorry, not the coastal, but the conservation lands is um just defining what harassment looks like when it comes to wildlife. Because at our properties like Boundary Bay and Roberts Bank, we have a big issue with photographers going into the marsh and harassing specifically the short-eared owls. So getting that the regulation, was a few years in the process, and now that's actually in place. Um, but yeah, that's again, it's another one of those things that it's education, just going out and teaching people how to properly um like ethical photography.
So
But yes,
is that
dogs is a good idea too.
well, you're right about photography. Is you say it's a new regulation?
Yeah, so it's a new like regional manager's order. Um, it was, and the big thing was the previous coordinator was defining what harassment looked like. Um, I think there was a bit of back and forth with the CEOs and all that, just to kind of come up with a definition that like made sense. Because there's a difference between like harassing a wildlife like by chasing it, but also just walking past and a bird flies away. Like those are two different things. So where do we kind of draw the line with that?
Yeah, that was a good thing. So I think everyone here who manages land is thinking about the balance like that.
Hmm.
Um, And then someone mentions Jillian that she's been doing invasive poles at Iona Beach for nearly 20 years. And
Hmm.
people, yeah, obviously a lot of people here have been spending many years doing invasive poles. And you
Yes.
mentioned with Scotch broom, which I know is a real issue at Iona Beach. But have for Scotch broom, I know you say it's not an issue at Beach Grove. Is that an issue in any of your properties?
Yes, it is. Um, especially in Lahatch, Harrison, Chehalis, so out in like the Harrison Agassiz kind of area. We've been working um on this one patch for a few years now. Um, the unfortunate thing with Scotch broom is that it's not one of our priority species, but we've kind of like snuck it in that we still maintain it because it's one of those things that I think, or like we think that like it's going to become an issue with climate change. Um, Obviously, it's not as bad as Vancouver Island or other places in the province, but we don't want um, we don't want it to become as bad throughout our property. So we're just trying to get ahead of it, and it's a fairly easy species to manage too. You just have to go and cut it. So we do our work. Most of the invasive species is that, or sorry, Scotch broom. We do have some sites in Boundary Bay and then Roberts Bank, Lahatz, Harrison Chehalis. Oh, there's one, and then the Serpentine.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Someone asked which site at Agassiz Harrison for broom.
So it's kind of I don't know how to describe it. It's like you know where the like it's kind of by the Sasquatch Inn and the road up to Sasquatch Mountain. And it's yeah, it's kind of in the forested area, and it's on our neighbor's property, which is it's a lodge owned by Stahelis First Nation. So we have worked with them and the Nature Trust to kind of push back this patch, and it's quite a large patch. Um, yeah, it's kind of along Morris Valley, just kind of in the bush there.
Mhm.
Um, Morris Valley Road up towards Sasquatch Inn. So that it's also a really cool area up there. Um,
Mhm. Well, and I also just going to point out if anyone, again, you guys can put your questions in the chat, but if anyone, I can look if anyone wants to raise their hand and unmute themselves and ask a question, um, that could we could do that as well. Just want to throw that out there. And well, I let if anyone, I'll look for that in a second, but and more questions. But one question I had too was all this work you're doing on the ground. Do you guys ever have volunteers that come out and help?
we've been trying. That's one thing I feel like our we've kind of been lacking. We do need more volunteers. It's always great to have volunteers. We do. Yes and no. It's a lot through partner organizations, so Ducks Unlimited. There's one initiative called the Nature Force, where they've partnered with insurance companies to kind of work on flood mitigation. So we've done plantings and some beach cleanups with those volunteers. So they're just people who work at the insurance corporations. They come out for half a day and kind of help, but um we are always in certain need of volunteers, I would say. And that would be,
Would they get in
um,
touch with you, or if someone knows like a group is looking to volunteer, they
yeah,
like it'll be through Ducks.
yeah, it would be either me or Megan,
Mhm.
realistically. If it's something specific, I think, yeah, there's a lot of opportunities to volunteer. I just don't think it's kind of been a focus on kind of creating a good group of volunteers to help us with things.
Hmm. Nice. Yeah, well, and only other question I was going to ask is about yellow flag iris and work on that. If you have any, have you had much success so far? How's that been going?
So we've only had the one patch, like we have the large patch with the serpentine and then some smaller patches at throughout Boundary Bay. Um, I would say it's been fairly successful, but with the larger patch, we've kind of kept like I think this summer will be the third year that the benthic barrier is down. Maybe this, yeah, it's the second or third year that the benthic barrier has been down, and then we just kind of been adding to it every year. Um, I think that will be successful. I'm hopeful for that
Okay.
area.
Yeah.
But the smaller patches are a bit easier because you can either just dig it up, and then we just because we keep going back every year, it seems to be, but to be doing good. But we've kind of it's been a focus only the last like year or two, so that's also we're a bit limited
Yeah.
on how much success we've had.
Yeah. Well, definitely. I mean, it sounds like you have a lot of, things you're learning and as you keep doing all this, obviously I think anyone here would be interested in hearing any of the like successes or any, lessons learned and things down
Hmm.
the road. So, please keep, sharing that. But I'm just looking and I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. And I'm going to throw it out one more time to the group if anyone wants to unmute and ask any more final questions.
Alison, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead,
It's
Rob.
Rob Knight.
Yeah.
I'm struggling with my iPhone to do this, so I apologize for what you see or hear. I did many years, probably 10, of mapping with volunteers and physically removing and then treating with herbicide Spartina anglica in
Mm.
Boundary Bay.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering if that invasive species is still under the purview of Ducks Unlimited and if you've had any involvement with it since I
Um,
left it in 2015.
yeah, Ducks Unlimited is still running that program. So Megan and I have some colleagues who they run the whole program. Um, yeah, so that work's still being done, and it's still it's BC. Sorry, it's not BCIT. It's Ducks Unlimited and the BC Conservation Federation are the two
Hmm.
kind of main. And then we also, because a lot of this is in the WMAs, like we try and get our field crews out with them during the summer because it's a good learning opportunity. They always need the extra hand. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Well, that's good to know. I was wondering whether it was still ongoing or whether they had just given up.
no,
But
it's still, and I think it's been quite successful.
yeah,
And we
there
have
was a trend
there's a question
to,
just about which invasive you're speaking of again.
oh, it
Yeah.
was primarily Spartina anglica, English cordgrass. The other Spartina species weren't found in Brunswick Point or Boundary Bay. Is that your question?
Yeah, someone just asked for wanted more info about that.
Yeah. And I suspect the one person said they pulled physically removed. I assumed it was in Boundary Bay, but maybe not. But in the early days, it was really difficult trying to keep up with just physically removing the plant. And we
Hmm.
were failing with many volunteers.
Yeah, they do. I think where they can use herbicide, they use herbicide. But I've had to go. There was a big patch on Vancouver Island that I think they spent like 3 or 4 weeks working on. So I had to go and
Hmm.
help them with that one year, just because the landowner didn't want them to use herbicide, which is totally
Hmm.
understandable.
Yeah.
Um, but it seems like they've had like a lot of the patches have gotten much smaller, and um, yeah, I
That
think they're really getting ahead of it.
the work you did in Vancouver Island with Spartina patents
I
in
think
the
so.
Denman Island area.
It was closer to Comox.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, yeah, it was like kind of a patch that wasn't detected up until I think I'm trying to remember what year I went over there, 2023. So it was
Mhm.
really big. It was a very large patch. Um,
Wow.
yeah.
How do you not see a large patch?
Yeah, who knows?
Hmm. Oh well. Thanks for the update.
No worries.
Any other questions from anyone? Oh, we have one more here. You mentioned land acquisition as a component of your work. Can you tell us more about SCLAMP's involvement in that realm? Any priority areas in mind for acquisition?
So Megan and I aren't as involved in that. I think it's just more through support of our partner organization. So like specifically Nature Trust, because Nature Trust is the one who they're more involved in land acquisition, and the Ducks does do some, but I don't think as much in the Lower Mainland. So we just more are supporting that, and also the province as well. But again, the province, I think I would say Nature Trust is the main kind of partner who does land acquisition. Um, I would say like once the land is bought and it's kind of transitioning to WMA, like our main kind of aspect is like working on the management plan and transitioning it to a WMA, but we're not as involved in the actual land acquisition.
You're the afterward.
Yeah.
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 Great. Any more questions? I think that's probably it there. Oh, and Rob's put about in the chat about the Spartina working group. Thank you, Rob. Or sorry, Tasha did. Thank you. Sorry, Tasha. So with that, I just want to say a huge thank you to you, Alison and Megan, for this really informative presentation today. Thank you so much. And say thank you to say Tasha Murray for helping out today, Environment and Climate Change Canada for their support, and of course all of you for taking time during your lunch period to come out and listen to this. Thank you so much.